How's everybody doing? Good. It's 11:30. It's still the morning, but we're almost done with it. So as Joelle introduced, we're here to talk about branding, specifically for architecture firms, also applies to interior design firms, developers, and things like that. And it's really in response to a lot of questions that we've gotten from our own clients, both in and outside of the architecture industry, just about, how do we have a brand that's really impactful and successful, but also how do we make it easy to implement, easy to keep up, and all those good things. So I'm Christina, and this is Monica. I'm a brand strategist at Entro.
I'm a designer at Entro.
And just a little bit about who Entro is. So we're, over 50 years old. We're an experiential graphic design firm, so we specialize in place branding and wayfinding. Our team is, we like to say we're international, interdisciplinary. So we really, we're made up of engineers, industrial designers, cognitive neuroscientists, brand strategists like me, graphic designers. So really the full gamut, and that allows us to provide really, holistic service and really think about everything from all angles. And really kind of our philosophy is it's all about connecting people to place, and I'm sure that resonates with a lot of you working in the built environment. It's about giving places identity and meaning, both through the brand itself, but also how it's carried out through the physical environment. We want our design to be beautiful, but importantly, we want it to be very practical. And all of this really can sum up in making everyday experiences inspirational. Whether you're taking the train, you're walking downtown, you're coming into your workplace, whatever that environment may be, we want to do our part to make it really inspirational. So this is just a snapshot of some of the actual brand identities we worked on. You might recognize some of them over the years. And most of the brand identities we actually create are always connected to a place at the end of the day. So we really are focusing on that full experience of place. And you can see that a lot of these identities are still present today. That's a big part of our philosophy too, is to make brands that are really timeless. So the services we provide go from everywhere from brand identity to wayfinding. But we always say it's not just about the logo, it's not just about the signs, it's about the full experience. So within this, we offer everything from research, writing, communications, digital applications, large-scale environmental graphics, industrial design. So really covering the full gamut. And what that means is that we work to understand and create brands that can communicate on something as small as a business card to the side of a building. This is one of our projects in Philadelphia. This is the FMC Tower, and it's a picture of the part of the sign being hoisted up 49 stories.
So we are really lucky and privileged to work on some amazing projects, iconic buildings and great architecture firms. So we worked on the Baha'i Temple in Chile, the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. This is Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. You know this one, it's the Ram crystal. This is the Jewel in Singapore at the airport. TD Towers, you know those. This is a recent project at the Calgary Central Library. And this was the Serpentine Pavilion by Big Architects. So they brought it to Toronto recently. West Bank kind of commissioned that. And we were lucky to do the whole exhibit within the structure.
Yeah, so this is to say that, we really do understand kind of where you're coming from, what you're trying to communicate. We work with architects all the time, and we also work in branding. So, working in a similar industry, we understand both the stresses and struggles, but also who you're trying to connect with. So this talk really is about branding specifically for architecture firms or interior design as well. We're just kind of interested, how many of you, by a show of hands, are coming from, maybe a smaller firm? Wow, okay. And how many from maybe a bigger firm? Maybe you're in the marketing department? Okay, so just a few. All right. So branding and architecture, it's funny, branding and marketing kind of have an interesting relationship in architecture, and that's in that they didn't always align. So back in the day, Up until probably the later end of the 1900s, the AIA banned all forms of advertising and marketing for architects. So you couldn't advertise, you couldn't even, put your name on the side of the building that you were creating. So it was completely banned. You weren't allowed to be part of public competitions. So what came out of that is this culture of, our buildings will speak for themselves and our great work will speak for itself. And, we can wait, and once they see it, they'll come in through the door and we can just wait. And I think that's changed a lot over the years. It's become a lot more sophisticated, and architecture firms are certainly branding themselves very, very well. But there is a bit of that culture still of, it's us and our buildings and that's it. But as projects become more international and we need to compete internationally, and as you can see, there's many, many different firms in the market, that need for a really consistent and strong brand that speaks for itself is very present. So what really makes up a brand? The word brand is used with everything today, especially with social media. People are talking about their own personal brand, which I'm not even sure what that is. But what does it mean in the context of architecture firms, our industry? So it's really more than a logo, as I mentioned. It's a promise that you make. It really guides every decision that you make, and it also creates an expectation both from your clients but also the public. And where a brand really lives is in basically everything you do. So, the more external touch points you'll probably recognize and seem obvious. Of course, it's on your website, your social media, if you have presentations, stationery, your projects certainly. But what we don't always think about is those more internal touch points. So your working style, how you work, your company culture, strategic directions you take. Maybe there's a merger in the future. Maybe you're taking on a different service. Maybe how you get engaged with the community. It really touches everything. And the first thing you want to think about with your brand and can really direct, the visual identity, the visual language, and then of course all those other touch points, is your brand framework. And that's simply made up of your positioning statement, which is the unique way you work, the unique offering you have. It's the place you take up in the market that you can own. It's what people think of instantly when they think about you and your company. The essence is that positioning really boiled down into a key statement or a few words. It tells you a little bit more intrinsically what you do. Your value proposition is the unique way you offer value, what you're actually providing for people. And your personality is kind of the more human traits you have that carry it out, and that also extends to visual language, messaging, things like that. And then if you do have, multiple brands in one firm or multiple services, the brand architecture really helps you figure out how those brands are organized, whether there's a master or sub-brand, what their relationship are they distinct entities, do they all kind of have a similar thread? Can everybody hear me okay, by the way? Yeah? Okay. And then the next thing you start to do, maybe you have a name already and this is irrelevant for you, or maybe you're thinking, maybe it's time that I change my name, or maybe, you're starting a firm and you're with your buddy at the bar trying to figure out what your name should be. We suggest a bit more fulsome of a process, but those qualities of an effective name that we always think about and we always encourage our clients to think about, it's kind of, our checklist when we're coming up with names, is that it's a meaningful name, so it symbolizes something that's really core to kind of that positioning or that vision for your brand or your company. It's distinctive, it sets itself apart from others. It's future-oriented, so both in the fact that it's flexible to, maybe you're going to take on new staff, new services, works on different types of buildings, so it allows you to grow. It doesn't kind of corner you into one position. But also it's not, trendy. It's not bucking to a trend that is happening now but will be outdated later. So it's really timeless. It's visual, so it lends itself well to a visual identity, a visual language, many different scales. It's positive, so it has, positive associations, both in the culture you're working in and also maybe others that you hadn't thought of. So you don't want to pick something that's positive here but means something totally different somewhere else. And it's descriptive, so it describes what you do. You, of course, can have a more abstract name, but as long as you have, descriptive language or other elements that support that and can describe that, this is the type of work we do, then you've got it.
Right, so if the first thing you think about when you're starting your company or evaluating your brand is the name, usually the second part that comes to mind is the logo. So your logo doesn't have to be a symbol, an abstract form, or an apple, or a shell. It's often just a word mark. So we find that design architecture firms often go the word mark way because your name is comprised of a number of names. And so this direction kind of relies on perfect typography, a creative choice of font, and a unique color choice. The next level would be coming up with like a modified typographic mark. And this is when you're kind of taking some of the letter forms and enhancing them or changing them in a way that's relevant. So for instance, the Banff Center for Arts and Creativity, they've turned the A into a mountain, which is cool. And then the next level is more like an illustrative word mark, where you're kind of combining a logo with the type. And it's kind of another level of creativity, of distinction. Often the forms are based on a letter form from the type. And something fun we like to show are these logos based on architecture. So these show up a lot with institutions that are based in kind of iconic buildings. The ROM, the logo's the crystal. The Sydney Opera House is obvious.
Yeah, and it can also reflect, for an architecture firm, even though you're not necessarily putting forward the space you're in, it might be the style of architecture that you have. So you see that with big architects. They have that very modular architecture.
Yeah, so we thought, it's always kind of fun to start off with some eye candy to begin with. So we're just going to show you some cool brands that we're liking right now that are relevant. So this is the Whitney Museum of American Art. And this brand was put together in, I think, 2015 by Experimental Jet Set, it's the branding firm. And while, it's a pretty straightforward word mark in a simple modern design, it's that W that makes it so special. And so it's like a modular logo, and it changes shape and form depending on the application they want to use it in. We were lucky enough to do the wayfinding for this, and we got to use the part of that W for the arrows, which is really cool. Here you can see their brand on more of their signage. It's simple, it's clean. Here we have Fathom Architects. So there are a number of things that we like about this brand. Like, first of all, it's this like hit you over the head, punchy royal blue. And that's a color that you don't see often in this industry. And they're using it in such a major, bold way. This is a good example of having like a standard word mark, but then they also have this logo that can be used alongside of it, independently from it, depending on the application. This little line that they've got above the F here becomes a pretty distinct graphic element throughout too. So here's that blue on their business cards, and there you see the line again. And the line is cool. It's so simple. It's just a rule line, but depending on how they use it, it looks like a horizon or a landscape or an architectural form. Their website looks a little stark here, but then you get into their project pages, and here's that blue again. Here's one of their renderings. Almost looks like a blueprint to me. Here we've got the Australian Association Council of Architects, I believe is the name. What we like about this one is, it's a regular acronym, but they've kind of paired up the letters with these neat little elements. It's almost a Morse code. It almost looks like lines from an architectural drawing, but they can be used in a really fun way too. And then that same language carries across their business cards and stationery. Blowing it up, supersize, becomes more of a graphic element that can be used. And so, while red is their primary color, you don't always have to kind of hit people over the head with it. They're bringing in these secondary colors that are really kind of more sensitive and beautiful. And again, it's really understated, just using that red line.
So as you can see, there's great ways to define that brand and make it really impactful. We saw an example where color is king, or the symbol is really flexible and has this kind of motion element to it. But what again are those key intrinsic things that make a brand really great? So we've thought about this a lot at our firm and kind of boiled it down to 3 things. First is that deep understanding of who you are, who your clients are, what you do, and where you want to go. And it's really inclusive of your people, again, what you provide. The second thing is a compelling brand framework. So once you've really done that soul searching and figured out who you are, it's encapsulating that in that brand framework. So that's that triangle I showed before. So something that reflects your values, your positioning, and really says something unique. Of course, you don't want to be watered. A big challenge that comes up is you might have lots of services and you want to express that you do all that. But then you don't want to water down what you are. So it's a tricky mix, but when you do kind of touch on those really unique things, you can come up with something really impactful. And the final part of a really successful brand is unified communication. So you take this brand framework and you bring it into communication, both verbal and visual, and it's consistent, it's easily recognizable. If you see this royal blue somewhere, you might think Fathom Architects, or if you see, this weird bended W, you might think Whitney. So it's really those three things. And so when we think about where the brand extends to, we have this neat case study of an architecture firm. And it both shows a really great example of a rebrand, but just all the areas that you should be thinking about. Because often, again, we think about stationery, website, visual identity, but there's really so much more. So this firm they were called Page Sutherland Page. They're an architecture, interior, engineering, and consulting firm. And they're 116 years old. And what they found is that, the names that are currently there, they don't reflect what the company is now. We have many more people in the company coming up and actually becoming part owners. We have this future direction, and we just don't feel like this reflects it. So they rebranded to Page. And of course, Page is one of the original names in the identity. They're very lucky because page, is a noun and it can mean so many things, turning a new page, all that good stuff. But it's bold, it's simple. It still keeps some of the feelings of the earlier brand through the color, but it's got this forward slash now. Another thing that Page is really known for is their fresh, innovative thinking. So this forward slash speaks to that forward-looking company ethos. And then also it can become kind of this container for other services. They can demonstrate their values, their different services that way. It also speaks to the future of the company, thinking about the future generation.
Right, so, while their legal name still is Page Sutherland Page Incorporated, they've kind of got this tagline now, like, hey, just call us Page, and it's friendly, it's approachable, and as a whole, we are just this one entity that is Page. And here you can see their nice new logo applied to their stationery on their proposals, master plan documents. So yeah, it's not too far away from the original brand. It's still that sans serif typeface on a dark background, simple, modern, but just elevated and with that really strong red. Here's their website. And of course, their mobile site. You can't forget that most people will be looking at your website from their phone. So do consider it, if not starting from the mobile design. And here's a segment from their brand guidelines. And what we really like about this is that it's not just talking about the logos, the colors, the typeface. They are talking about their visions and values. So here they've got creativity, collaboration, and commitment. And you'll see this kind of pop up a lot through their stuff. And not only just listing those things, but what is it about? Commitment's about integrity, respect, giving, and discipline. They've also included this paragraph here, which is, what's a brand beyond a promise? So they're also educating people about what a brand really is and what it can be. So, their staff, their partners, onboarding new people, everyone can really get on board with this brand and, know who they are. And then of course you have, your logo lockups, photographic styles. It's pretty cool that on their website they have a page speaking about their visions and values. Not everyone does this. So if you are thinking about engaging Paige, working with them, you immediately know kind of what you're buying into and that you're going to be a part of it too. The creativity, collaboration, and commitment. Your brand also extends, beyond your website and your printed documents to your community outreach and your involvement with initiatives. So, here's a slide celebrating women in construction. And so that also really aligns with their whole forward thinking, / their Instagram feed. So your Instagram feed is a really great opportunity to, show people what you're about, not only your own work, but work that you're interested in. So most of the images on their feed is, not their own stuff, but buildings that they've come across. There's a couple images here throughout the feed. Someone is out sketching these iconic buildings, and then they take a snapshot of their sketch. And that happens throughout. And it's really nice because that speaks to, that creativity value. And people can see that, they are artistic, they are creative. It's not just about the building stairwells.
Yeah, so I'm actually just curious, how many of you, raise your hands, have a brand guidelines document for your firm? Put them up really high. So that's interesting. That's probably, I maybe counted 6 or 7 of you. And how many of you have something written like a vision statement, mission statement, a positioning, value proposition? Okay, some more. Nice. So yeah, so those are 2 key things that are really good to have. Of course, I understand for smaller firms, but if you do intend to grow and bring in new people, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, make some of those decisions and processes a little bit quicker, it's a really good thing to have. So what else can a brand do, other than looking pretty and making consistency? So the benefits of a solid brand is, how I mentioned, it's a guide for decision making. So, you don't always have to rethink who you are and where you're going. You can always bring yourself back to your mission, your vision, your positioning, and really understand and just remind yourself of what you started out off as and where you'd like to go. It aligns your values and business objectives, so it makes sure that who you are is in close connection with what you're doing with your business. It obviously makes you easily recognizable and differentiates you from your peers. Importantly, especially important for firms that are a little bigger than 1 or 2 people, it engages your team. It helps them understand why they're doing the work that they're doing and what greater impact it has and how it aligns with what the company's doing as a whole. And that's obviously really important for retention and also for your staff being your biggest brand ambassadors when they're going to meetings, even if they're at a cocktail party, talking to friends, everything. And then most importantly, because of all this, it's a huge time-saving tool, both in the brand guidelines and both in those strategic decisions. So you're not always having to go back with strategic decisions, or when you're creating a proposal or another presentation, you're not having to always go back and reinvent the wheel. It's, and Monica will talk a little bit later about how templates and things like that make it a lot easier.
Right. So the brand police. Once you have done all this work, creating your brand, going through and thinking about your visions, your values, your logo, your colors, your typography, how do you go forward making sure that it all stays consistent? How can we maintain the brand across all of the different touch points, and why is it important? A lot of people are going to get their hands on your brand, unless it's just yourself, and a couple other people working for you. But you will have people, putting out emails, and do they have the proper email signature? Are people using the right letterhead? Are they speaking in the same tone of voice that you want them to? So of course, a brand guideline is a great place to start.
And these are guidelines we created for a firm, Arconis. They do public furniture in a lot of public spaces. They're most known for airport furniture, but they did a little bit of a brand adjustment and a little bit of soul searching because they had that same issue. You know, we're always going back to the drawing board when we need to make big decisions, and so they really needed to understand who they were as they were growing as well.
So, you know, if you're familiar with a brand guideline, it will often include your color palette. It's pretty important. And you know, there's your primary colors, and then you can have your secondary colors. And in this case, they have a tertiary color palette, which is great for introducing some flexibility and variations. You'll talk about your typefaces. So, you know, pick a typeface and stick with it. Don't let people use Times New Roman unless that is your chosen typeface, which is fine. You know, it's always good to have one chosen for body text and one chosen for headline text. And then include your logo and include the appropriate uses of your logo. You know, you don't want someone putting the Arconis logo in, you know, pink on a black background. That's not how it works, right? Here we're also showing how it would work in a partner lockup. So it's pretty important to make sure that your logo maintains its integrity when it's aligned with others. We have pages talking about like graphic layouts, the use of, you know, elements like the slant here needs to be consistent, the style of photography that you're going to use. So another example we like, this is the Invest in Northern Ireland group. And so they have their regular visual brand guideline, but they also have this tone of voice guideline, which is a separate document. And it's neat because it talks about your writing style. And so, you know, if it's a larger group, you might have a number of people writing for you, whether it's online or in a proposal. So here they're talking about their headlines. They want it to be informative, positive, plain speaking, and human. And then they even go into, you know, examples of good body copy. You know, they want it to say, it should have a consistent style, it should be informative, positive, plain speaking, and human again. Right, so how do you maintain it? If it's yourself, you know, you are your own brand police. If you have a small group or a large group of people, it's a good idea to assign someone that role. If you have a marketing department, they're kind of your first go-to. Having your brand guideline document set up, and you know, it doesn't need to be a major, like, you know, 25-page, well-designed thing. It could be a simple document that you can pull up and pass on to others that just says, this is our font, this is our Pantone color, you know.
You can also include some of those attributes, you know, like your value proposition, positioning, and things like that, just all in one document as well.
Yeah, just having like a go-to thing that you can always refer to. A regular brand check-in. You know, we find even in our own firm, sometimes things can go wishy-washy. Someone ends up with a different version of the trade Gothic font, and then it doesn't translate as well. And so we're always kind of, you know, reevaluating, are people using the right tools? Do they have the right tools? Is this what we want to say? Staff meetings are a good time to check in. So creating templates is pretty major one for us. So if you have a letterhead, do it in a Word template, make an InDesign template, make a Google Docs template, whatever you can. Whatever makes it easy for people to like get a hold of these assets and use them, then there's no excuses. And that goes for good file management as well. You know, if these templates and your brand document are buried in some random folder in documents or on your desktop that no one's ever going to find, then they're not going to use it. So don't give people excuses to not stick to it. All right. So another thing to talk about is differentiation. So, you know, there are many architecture firms in Toronto, in Ontario. And like, how can you make sure that you are not lost in the sea? And how can you really stand out amongst your peers?
Yeah, so we wanted to just ask you, you might recognize this firm, it's Mori Mitsushima. But we just wanted to hear if you can raise your hand and speak loudly, just some words that you think of when you see this. They can be words, adjectives. Yeah. Human? Cube. Yeah.
Yeah.
Precise?
Yeah.
That was yours. Okay. Organized? Yeah. Elegant?
Yeah, for sure. And so those are like, just by looking at this really simple word mark, like you've already listed a bunch of their brand attributes. It's another example of when you can have, like the Fathom architects, you can have your word mark or you can have that logo and they can work interchangeably or stand alone. And then on the flip side, we've got big architects. So what do you think of when you see this?
Pixels?
Yeah.
Creative?
Yeah.
What other types of qualities? Playful?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And all those, I think, would correctly characterize big architects. Here's their website. It's a little different, but it's certainly playful, and it's certainly pixelated. And what's interesting is, I guess you're familiar with his work, their work, and they like to work with these modules, and they're often creating like a whole form from essentially pixels. Hot pink. And they carry it through, like even to the building branding. So this is the new King building that's going on King West by West Bank. Right, and so, you know, those are two firms with really different feels and really different like looks to them. So you can look at this collection here and think, like, where do you fit in? Where do I fit in this scene? And here we're showing, you may have noticed the BBB architects changed here. So they came to us a number of years ago with that question. They're like, how do we fit in? Like, how can we stand out? We don't want to just fit in. We want to differentiate ourselves. They also wanted to move away from the BBB name and then start going by the title name, Brisbane, Brook, Bain and Architects. So what we did is we went away from the black and white and we introduced some color. So yellow is not a color that turns up a lot in the industry. Also, BBB Architects had this kind of nickname for a lot of years that was the Killer Bees. And so we played a lot, like we did a lot of exploration with the black and the yellow and the gray. And we kind of created this, it's not modular, but it's a playful logo in that you're flipping things on its side. And by taking the names and putting them on their side, you still get that BBB Architects, but you've got the full names in there too. And it's creating kind of like an architectural form. You know, you got your towers and your podium. Here it is on the business cards. So just like the logo can be played with, you know, the color palette can be played with as well. Still remaining consistent, but just different arrangements. What we like about the word mark is that it can be put on its side and it still reads the same way. On their proposals. And that's how it works on the website too. Giveaways. And the brand even extends to your title block. Don't forget that. Great, so a little activity here that we call Fix the Brand. Now that we know all about, like, you know, consistency and tone of voice and color, like looking at this is Hammond Bernier Architects. What's wrong? Yes?
Their letter, is it sans serif and everything else?
That's right, so the letter is written in a sans serif type, everything else is using a serif typeface. Anything else?
Color?
The color? What's wrong with the color? It's inconsistent, yeah. So they've got, you know, the red on the business card matches the red on this website here, but somebody just decided to use blue one time. Anything else? The logo, that's right. So they suddenly have a logo here when they didn't before, this little acronym. Not acronym, initial. Yeah, and also like, if you look at this letterhead and then look at the website, they don't have the same feel. Like that red on black is a really strong statement, right? It's really bold, it's kind of dark, whereas this, you know, the light blue is a bit more airy and approachable looking. So, you know, there are some like, you don't have to hire someone and spend, you know, $35,000 to do this. You can like quickly yourself just make some adjustments and really kind of unify things. So we did this little exercise here where we didn't introduce anything new. We used everything that they already had and just kind of rearranged it in a way that was really, you know, a bit more consistent. So we liked that little logo that someone put together once, so we ran with it. We're keeping the same word mark because it's beautiful. It's really well typeset. We liked the blue from the letterhead because they felt that they wanted to be more approachable and friendly and not have that kind of dark look about them. Using the same typeface. And then like suddenly everything really works together and is really consistent.
So we've kind of touched on the idea of a rebrand before, but you know, we always say we don't want to just jump to a rebrand if it's not necessary. So how do you kind of assess whether you need to look at your brand again? So as Monica mentioned before, it's all about those check-ins. So the things that you want to check in about are, has the market changed? You know, are people expecting different things? Are you going into a different market? You know, has that piece changed? Have your clients changed? Are you going for different clients? As I mentioned before, are their needs changing? Have your services changed? Are you doing something new, adding on a new service? Maybe you're merging with another company that provides something else. Has there been a strategic shift? You know, have new people come in? Are we going for new type of business? Are we wanting to express something different about ourselves? And then probably most importantly, it's very important to ask, does your ideal perception, so the perception that you want people to have of you and that you work so hard to create, match what people actually perceive of you? It's really important, and as I mentioned before, you can ask those type of questions. You can talk to your clients. You can, you know, if your projects are really public facing and have a lot of presence that way, you can talk to the public. But just really figuring out, do those two things match? Because that's probably the most important question to ask. Just another fun example. So Gensler is another example of just like a slight rebrand. So originally it was M. Arthur Gensler Jr. and Associates. Over time, they wanted to open it up a little bit, so it became Gensler Associates. And now, I think since the 1990s, they've just been Gensler. Same type of thing as the Page example, where they're opening it up to, you know, employee ownership. They have a forward direction that they're trying to go, and they don't want everything just brought down to, you know, a name and associates. Gensler is now stands for so much more, and everybody can really own that identity. And visually, you know, they're trying to own the color red, which I think they do in a lot of ways. You know, it's a friendly typeface, it's modern, it's clean, but it still has that timelessness.
Right, so for some more fun, and because everybody likes a train wreck, we're gonna look at some classic examples of rebrands gone wrong. And don't worry, none of them are architecture firms.
Yeah, we're not that stupid.
Do you remember this one? No. So, okay, Tropicana. Still looks the same today, right? This is their original brand, their original packaging. And I think it was in 2008, they decided that they wanted to be more modern. They wanted to show the product. So rather than an orange, they wanted to show like an actual glass of orange juice. And this is what they came up with. Do you remember it? No, because it wasn't out for very long. So in the first month, they immediately saw a 20% drop in sales. And so after that, they did some research, like, holy crap, how did this happen? And they polled their consumers, and it turns out that people didn't recognize it anymore. When they were in the grocery store, they were just reaching for that orange with the straw, and they couldn't find it anymore. They went so modern with it that it almost looked cheap. People thought that it was like the generic store brand, like a no name, right? That Helvetica type there. So it lost all of its personality, it lost all of its like differentiation, and 2 months later they went back to the original packaging, and it cost them $35 million. Woo! Do you remember this one? The Gap. So the Gap logo is fine, it's great, it's iconic. Someone decided it was time to change it, and they came up with this. It's Helvetica. It's a square with a gradient. And this was actually the start of what was going to be like a crowdsourcing campaign. And so they put this out onto the internet, and they effectively blew up the internet for 2 days. And every designer out there was like, what's wrong with you? This is terrible, this is garbage. And then 2 days later, they went back to the original one. So, they gave in to the pressures around them, but it really is like, it just doesn't speak to the brand at all. Nobody felt it was time for a rebrand. And the rumor is that this cost them $100 million. Seems high to me. Great, so what can you do right now? If you're gonna leave this talk and go back to your office and try to tackle your brand, what are the first steps that you can take?
So, as I mentioned before, it's all about soul searching. So, sit down with the core team and talk about all those earlier questions. Has the market changed? Have our clients changed? Are we really putting out there, or is that message being received that we want to send out there?
Pick a font and a color palette and stick with it. Be true to it, own it. Don't change it because you feel like it. Just, consistency is key. Putting together your brand guideline. Like I said before, it doesn't need to be a really elaborate document. It can just be a one-pager that says, use this color, use these fonts, this is our logo. And make sure that you're sharing it and distributing it with your whole office.
Templates are key, making them easily accessible, kind of in that branding folder, and make sure that branding folder is organized, of course. And then, one of the last things is educate staff. Hold a staff meeting. Mm-hmm. Don't talk about, don't just present the brand guidelines. Talk about why they're important and what they represent, and try to really communicate the message that this branding is really key to who you are. And yeah, just to reiterate, the three kind of core tenets of a great brand is this deep understanding of who you are. Really wrapping that up, I really encourage you all to at least create, a positioning statement and maybe a vision statement to really just put in writing who you are and what you are and how you're unique. And then carry it out through unified communication, through that, consistent color palette, typeface, messaging, tone of voice, that should carry you on the road. So yeah, I guess we'll open it up to some questions.